How long can you hold your breath? I remember as a kid trying to figure out how long I could hold my breath, and I would even time myself and stuff. But I can never make it much more than a minute, I don't think. The moment you start holding your breath, your body kind of panics, right? It's not good. It feels uncomfortable. It's hard to do. And even the best of us usually can't hold it longer than about 3 minutes, right? Your body needs oxygen. And yet there can be a benefit from denying ourselves something that we need for a certain amount of time. Now, am I talking about holding our breath here? No, I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about the spiritual discipline, the spiritual practice of fasting. Now, most of us know what fasting is. Even in popular culture today, it's become a thing again. Intermittent fasting is a diet, right? But when we talk about the spiritual discipline of fasting, we're talking about something a little bit different, or at least the motives are different. So I want to start out with first, what is fasting? Because as I hear people talk about it, a lot of people talk about fasting as giving up anything for a certain period of time, right? Abstaining from it, giving it up for a certain period of time. And yet I want to push back against that a little bit. Because a lot of people will, for instance, give up, sugar for a certain amount of time, or they'll give up social media. And the problem with that, it's a great thing to do, but I think it's different than giving up something that you need, like food, for a period of time. Because when you give up something like social media, it gets easier the longer you go, right? The first couple days are difficult. You keep going for that app. But after a few days, you start forgetting about it. And after a few weeks, you don't even remember it at all. And after a month, you may even say, I'm never going back to that. I'm going to give it up permanently. But you'd never do that with food, would you? You abstain from food for a little while, but it gets harder and harder the longer you go. And at the end of a month, you would never say, I'm never going back to food again. No, because you would die, right? We need food. And denying ourselves, abstaining from food or something that we need for a period of time makes us more dependent on God, which is part of the point of fasting. And so that's what fasting is, giving up something you need for a certain period of time, like food. And so what does the Bible say about fasting? Well, most of what's in the Bible about fasting is descriptions of when people fasted. Throughout the Old Testament, we find different times when the Israelites fasted when they were looking for direction from God, when the Ninevites fasted because Jonah had told them that God was going to destroy them, when Esther asked her cousin Mordecai to fast before she went into the king to ask for help. They would deny themselves something they need to get more of God, to get his help, to get his direction in their lives. And that's a good description of what fasting can do for us. By the time you get to the New Testament, it seems that fasting was a regular practice, a regular spiritual practice of the Pharisees, for instance. And yet Jesus pushes back against them. They were doing it to get the attention of others. And yet Jesus says that's not the point of fasting. The point of it is not to get attention from others, but it's between you and God. And so that's what we see a lot of in the Bible about fasting. And so we get to, okay, why should I fast? Besides that kind of special circumstances when you're looking for direction from God about school or marriage or a job, when it can be good to fast, to look for direction, to look for help from God, why should I do it as a regular thing, a monthly or a weekly spiritual practice? What's the point of doing it that way? Well, I think there's two big reasons. Number one is to pray more. And you hear, this is the popular reason, right? Fasting and praying go together. When you deny yourself food, right, the hunger pains remind you to pray, and that time you would have spent eating, you can dedicate to prayer. And that's true, and that's good. And I think that's one of the primary reasons that we should fast. But there's another reason that often doesn't get talked about or looked at, and yet I think it's just as important as the prayer. When we practice this, right, we talk about spiritual practices also as spiritual disciplines. When we fast, we're disciplining our body. We're saying no to something that we need. And that helps us. That builds up muscles to say no to other things that we just want. Well, why would we need to say no to things that we just want? Well, sin is one of those things that we want. One of the biggest struggles, one of the biggest obstacles we have with our relationship with God, with following him more, with practicing the way of Jesus, is sin. And it's hard to say no to sin. Temptation comes and it's hard for us to say no. But when we fast, we build up those saying no muscles. When we can say no to something good, something that we need, like food, for several hours out of the day, it helps us to say no to sin later. And this is one of the biggest benefits I found in my own life. Because when I'm fasting, I'm much less likely to fall into temptation. I'm already used to saying no to something, and I can say no to that. When I do it on a regular basis, my whole week, my whole life is better because I'm more able to say no to sin. So that's why we should do it. But how do we do it? What does this look like in your life as a follower of Jesus? Well, I'll just kind of tell you how I started out and how I do it. And that may be what works for you too. I started out probably 4 or 5 years ago doing it once a month. So I picked like the first Monday of the month, a consistent time, which is important, and I would fast. But after a few months, I saw the benefit of it so much that I decided to move to once a week. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been practicing this, not all the time, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you pick the same day of the week, because if you try to change days each week, you'll end up just not doing it, right? You'll keep putting it off and then not doing it. But pick a consistent day of the week and skip breakfast and lunch, right? We're not talking about fasting for a whole week or something like that. I've tried that twice in my life and failed miserably both times. Did not make it more than 36 hours, and it wasn't very fruitful. So I'm more of an advocate of doing it on a regular basis for 2 meals. So I skip breakfast and lunch. So basically, it turns out to be the night before I have dinner, and then after that, I have about 23, 24 hours where I don't eat until the dinner the next night. This is kind of like fasting until sundown, if you've heard that idea before. And so that's what I've done. And I can tell you that it's made a difference in my life. And there's been seasons where I've decided not to do it, whether because I just didn't feel like it, or I said, I'm going to stop fasting for a little while. And I can tell you that temptation to sin has always come back stronger when I'm not regularly building up those resisting temptation muscles that come with fasting. And sometimes I pray a lot more and sometimes I don't, but it was still worth it because I'm still practicing, I'm still disciplining my body with the desire to follow Jesus more. And the whole point of this fasting thing is that I give up something that I need in order to get more of God.